The Zephyrian Empire's most advanced reconnaissance vessel, the Witnessing Dawn, drifted silently at the edge of contested space like a ghost watching from the shadows. Commander Veldar stood at his command station, his three-fingered hand hovering over the holographic display that bathed his face in blue light. His silver eyes narrowed as his crew detected something unexpected. An unknown warship was emerging from a jump corridor, tearing through the fabric of space itself. Veldar leaned forward slightly. "Analysis," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of Zephyrian military tradition. His tactical officer studied the readings, and what he saw made him pause before responding. "Primitive construction, Commander," he finally said, unable to hide a note of disdain. Patchwork armor, plating scattered across the hull. Exposed weapon systems that should be internal. Fusion drives that appear to be at least 2 generations behind current galactic standard. The bridge crew exchanged knowing glances. They had seen this before. The Zephyrians had observed 847 different species over the course of 3,000 years. Each time, it was the same pattern. Young species, barely out of their home systems, stumbling into conflicts they couldn't possibly win. This would be another routine cataloging mission. Another entry in their vast database. Another footnote in the great library of galactic civilizations. Veldar settled back into his command throne, already mentally composing his report. He activated their quantum link monitoring systems with a casual gesture. The technology was so advanced that breaching the alien ship's communication networks took mere seconds. The crude encryption these newcomers used might as well have been written on paper and left in plain sight. What came through the speakers next made Veldar's scales ripple in confusion, a physical reaction his species only experience when confronted with something genuinely unexpected. Laughter. Actual laughter. Then music. Something with guitars and drums that seemed almost aggressive in its energy, and voices engaged in casual banter, as if they were sitting in a cantina rather than a warship in hostile territory. The monitoring officer turned up the volume, and everyone on the Zephyrian bridge fell silent, listening in disbelief. And then Miller says to the captain, a male voice was saying between fits of laughter, "Sir, that's not the airlock, that's the bathroom." The voice dissolved into howling amusement, joined by several others. Another voice cut through the laughter, authoritative but not harsh. "Belay that chatter." This is Captain Jake Morrison. "We've got 3 enemy fleets converging on our position. ETA 15 minutes. There was a brief pause. Then a female voice responded with what could only be described as mock disappointment. "Ah, hell, Cap, just when poker night was getting good. I had a full house, too." Someone else chimed in, "You always say you have a full house, Beth." "That's because I always do," Beth shot back, and more laughter echoed through the channel. Veldar stared at his monitoring station, as if it had personally betrayed him. His predictive AI, a system that had successfully anticipated the behavior of hundreds of species, was flickering with error messages. Red warnings cascaded across the screen. The computer simply couldn't process what it was observing. According to every metric they possessed, the humans were in imminent mortal danger. 3 entire enemy fleets were bearing down on their position. Yet these creatures showed no signs of distress. No panic. No activation of fear protocols. No desperate calls for reinforcements. His science officer voiced what everyone was thinking. "They're either supremely confident or supremely stupid, Commander." Veldar studied the data flowing across his screens. The human ship's crew compartment showed elevated heart rates. Yes, but not the spike you expect from beings facing certain death. Their brain chemistry was normal. They were actually relaxed. Some were still playing their card game. "Maintain observation," Veldar ordered. Try to keep confusion from his voice. "They'll flee or surrender within the hour. They always do." It was a pattern as old as space combat itself. When a weaker force encountered a stronger one, survival instinct took over. They ran or they begged for mercy. It was a logical response. It was a sane response. The Zephyrians had witnessed it 847 times before. The human warship, designated Yenesi Indomitable according to their registry, hung motionless in space, just waiting there like it had all the time in the world. 3 enemy fleets appeared on the Zephyrian scanners, Over 60 vessels in total, closing fast from 3 different vectors. It was a classic pincer movement designed to eliminate any possibility of escape. Veldar pulled up the tactical display, watching the enemy ships draw closer. The humans had maybe 20 minutes before the first fleet entered weapons range. 15 minutes before all 3 fleets could coordinate their attack. Any reasonable commander would be calculating jump coordinates right now. Any sane crew would be preparing to abandon ship. Instead, the Zephyrians listened to humans continue their conversation about card games and bathroom mishaps. "Sir," his communications officer said hesitantly, "should we attempt to warn them? They may not be aware of the danger." Veldar considered it. The Zephyrian Empire maintained strict non-interference protocols, but there were exceptions for species facing extinction. Before he could respond, another transmission came through from a human ship. "All hands, this is the captain." Jake Morrison's voice had changed now, taking on a different quality. Still calm, but with an edge of steel underneath. "Today's going to be interesting. Protocol Charlie Foxtrot is now in effect. Remember your training, watch each other's backs, and let's show these bastards why you don't mess with Earth." "Hoo-yah!" The response came from dozens of voices at once, a unified roar that made Veldar physically recoil from his speakers. The sound was raw, primal, and carried a frequency that is species associated with apex predators issuing a challenge. His medical officer was frantically checking the biometric readings. "Commander!" Their adrenaline levels just spiked, but not from fear. Their brain chemistry indicates they're excited, anticipatory. They're looking forward to this. "That's impossible," Veldar said, but even as he spoke, he knew he was watching something unprecedented. No species welcomes combat against overwhelming odds. The tactical officer's voice was tight with tension. "Sir, the human vessel isn't powering weapons. They're doing something to their reactor instead. Power levels are climbing rapidly. They're at 110% capacity, 120, 130. That's beyond safe operating limits." The engineering specialist protested. "Their ship will tear itself apart from the stress." 140%, the tactical officer continued, his voice rising. "Sir, they've disabled their safety systems. All of them. Every single failsafe is offline." Veldar's scales went pale, a Zephyrian physiological response to genuine shock. What are they doing? The answer came seconds later when the Indomitable's engines suddenly erupted with brilliant blue fire. The human warship lurched forward, accelerating directly toward the center of the enemy formation. Not a flanking maneuver to buy time, not a defensive position to maximize their shields. A direct charge, straight into the teeth of 3 fleets. "By the ancestral void," Veldar whispered, using an oath he hadn't spoken in decades. "They're going to ram them." His entire bridge crew watched in stunned silence as the small human warship hurtled towards 60 enemy vessels like a meteor burning through atmosphere. On their monitoring feed, they could hear the humans coordinating their attack with precise, almost casual efficiency. "Weapons, target their formation leaders first," Captain Morrison ordered. "Aye, sir. Painting targets now." Lieutenant Beth Foster responded. Someone else added, "Engine room reports reactor holding stable at 140%. Chief says she'll give us 10 minutes at this output before things get dicey." 10 minutes is 9 more than we need," Morrison said, and incredibly, Veldar could hear the smile in his voice. The Zephyrian commander realized with creeping dread that he wasn't watching a desperate last stand. He wasn't observing a species facing extinction with brave resignation. He was watching something far more disturbing. These humans weren't accepting their fate. They weren't hoping to survive. They were genuinely, honestly planning to win. The first enemy salvo lit up the darkness of space like a small sun being born. Dozens of plasma bolts streaked across the void, painting everything in shades of green and blue fire. The Zephyrian crew, watching from their cloaked position, expected to see the human ship desperately attempting evasive maneuvers. That's what any rational being would do when facing that much incoming fire. The Indomitable didn't evade. Instead, it rolled with deliberate precision, rotating its hull so that its armored belly faced the incoming storm. The plasma bolt slammed into thick plating, scorching metal and vaporizing outer layers, but the ship held together. And while it was absorbing punishment that would have crippled most vessels, its dorsal railguns swiveled and fired with mathematical precision. 3 enemy fighters simply ceased to exist, torn apart by electromagnetically accelerated projectiles, moving at a fraction of light speed. "Ho, breach Deck 7!" Someone shouted over the human communications channel, their voice tight with urgency. Captain Morrison's response came immediately, his voice steady and almost casual, like he was discussing the weather. "Seal it and keep firing. We didn't come here to play defense." Veldar watched the screens in complete disbelief as the human ship plunged deeper into what could only be described as a maelstrom of fire and shrapnel. Enemy vessels surrounded them on 3 sides now, pouring everything they had into the Indomitable. Explosions blossomed across its hull. Pieces of armor plating tore free and spun away into the void. Atmosphere vented from multiple breaches, creating ghostly white plumes in the vacuum. But the humans kept fighting. Their maneuvers defied every tactical doctrine in the Zephyrian military database, doctrines that had been refined over thousands of years and hundreds of conflicts. The humans weren't trying to minimize damage. They weren't attempting to preserve their ship for a fighting retreat. They were trading hits like brawlers in a bar fight, accepting wounds just so they could get close enough to deliver killing blows. "Target their engines," Morrison commanded, his tactical display showing an enemy cruiser moving into position. "Sir, that shot's blocked by their destroyer," Lieutenant Foster reported from weapons. "No angle. They're using it as a shield." "Then make an angle. Harris, roll us 70 degrees starboard and give me 2 seconds." There was a brief pause, and Veldar could hear the hesitation in the response. "Sir, that'll expose our reactor housing to direct fire. That's our most vulnerable." "I said do it." Morrison's voice carried absolute authority, no room for debate. The Indomitable flipped through space like a coin being tossed, its entire hull rotating to expose the section that housed its main reactor. For 2 eternal seconds, enemy fire poured directly into the ship's most critical systems. Alarms blared. Damage reports flooded in. The Zephyrian observers watched in horror, certain they were about to witness a reactor breach that would vaporize the entire vessel. But in those 2 seconds, Lieutenant Foster had her angle. She fired 3 railgun rounds in rapid succession. The first punched through the destroyer's superstructure like it was paper. The second and third continued through the wreckage and slammed into the cruiser's engine compartment beyond. The enemy vessel's fusion drive went critical and exploded in a cascade of nuclear fire that lit up the battlefield and took 2 nearby fighters with it. The Indomitable righted itself, bleeding atmosphere from 4 new breaches, its hull glowing red-hot in places from the punishment it had absorbed. But it was still fighting, still moving, still firing. "Medical team to Deck 9. We got wounded." Dr. Emily Parker's voice cut through the chaos on the communications channel. Morrison's response carried a hint of concern. "Emily, I thought you were operating on Jenkins?" "I am operating." Parker shot back, and Veldar could hear the sound of medical equipment beeping in the background. "I've got Petty Officer Davis open on the table right now. I'm just multitasking. Got a request for you, though, Captain. Could you maybe not do that spinning thing for the next 5 minutes? I'm trying to reattach a spleen here. I'll do my best. Document. No promises." On the witnessing dawn, Veldar's medical officer looked like he might faint. His face had gone completely pale, and he was staring at the biometric readouts like they were showing him something impossible. "She's performing surgery during combat maneuvers," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The gravitational forces alone should make precision cutting impossible. One wrong move and she could kill her patient." The science officer was frantically checking his instruments. Their species must have extraordinary inertial dampening systems. Some kind of internal gravity stabilizers were not detecting. The engineering specialist shook his head, looking at his own readings with confusion. "Negative, Commander. Their dampeners are offline, completely non-functional. According to these readings, they're experiencing 14 gravities in some sections of that ship." 14? That should kill them, the medical officer protested. "Their internal organs should be liquefying." Their bones should be shattering under their own weight. Should, but clearly isn't, Veldar muttered, unable to look away from the display showing the human ship dancing through space like physics was merely a suggestion. Deep in the Indomitable's engineering section, Chief Bradley sprinted through corridors filled with smoke and sparks. His hands moved with practiced efficiency over plasma conduits that crackled with barely contained fury, rerouting power on the fly as systems failed and backups kicked in. Bobby, reroute tertiary power to forward shields. Do it now. Ensign Bobby Mitchell looked up from his station, his eyes going wide. Chief, you're standing inside an active plasma relay. Get out of there. Bradley didn't move, his hands still working controls that were literally inches from superheated plasma that could vaporize him in an instant. I know exactly where I'm standing. Just do what I told you. The conduits around Bradley began to glow white-hot, the temperature rising to levels that would melt most metals. His uniform started to smoke at the shoulders. The smell of burning fabric filled the air. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, his focus absolute as he completed the manual reroute that would keep their forward shields operational. Only when the power flow stabilized did he step back, casually patting out a small fire that had started on his sleeve like it was the most normal thing in the world. Mitchell stared at him with a mixture of terror and admiration. You're a crazy bastard, Chief. Bradley grinned, his face streaked with soot and sweat. That's why they pay me the big bucks, kid. Now get back to work. This fight's not over yet. Veldar pulled up the human biological readings again, studying them with growing unease. Every single crew member showed adrenaline levels that should trigger cardiac arrest. Their hearts were beating at rates that should be fatal. Pain signals were flooding into their brains from various injuries, signals that should be overwhelming their nervous systems and leaving them incapacitated. But somehow, through sheer force of will, they were suppressing it, functioning through it, fighting through it. Their brain chemistry had shifted into patterns that Veldar's medical database flagged as temporary insanity, the kind of chemical imbalance that would require immediate psychiatric intervention in any other species. They're drugging themselves, Veldar concluded, searching for a rational explanation, some kind of combat stimulant, a chemical enhancement that allows them to push past normal biological limits. His medical officer ran additional scans, then looked up with haunted eyes. Negative, sir. No foreign substances detected in their bloodstreams. No drugs. No enhancements. No modifications. This is just them. This is what they naturally do when threatened. The Indomitable spun through space in a brutal dance of controlled chaos, each movement precise despite appearing reckless. They used floating debris as cover, hiding behind the wreckage of destroyed enemy ships. They fired their own severed hull plating at pursuing fighters like improvised projectiles. On one occasion, they deliberately vented their own atmosphere from a damaged section, using the explosive decompression to create a thrust vector that dodged an incoming missile salvo by mere meters. Commander Hayes, mark target Sierra 7 for kinetic package, Morrison ordered, his voice calm despite the hell erupting around his ship. Aye, sir. Weapons free. Hayes responded immediately. Package away in 3, 2, 1 mark. Veldar watched as a section of the Indomitable's hull simply opened up, and he expected to see another missile launch. Instead, what emerged made his scales ripple with confusion and then slowly dawning horror. The humans were ejecting garbage, twisted metal fragments, broken equipment, shattered armor plating, all the damage they had accumulated during the battle, all the pieces that had been torn from their ship they had apparently been collecting, and now they were using it as a weapon. The enemy dreadnought emerged from jump space like a nightmare made manifest. One moment there was empty void, and the next, reality itself seemed to tear open as the massive vessel forced its way back into normal space. It was a mountain made of metal and malice, stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. The thing was 50 times the Indomitable's mass, its hull covered in weapon batteries that bristled like the spines of some deep space predator. This was a ship designed for one purpose: to obliterate anything that stood in its way. It had enough firepower to crack a moon in half or reduce an entire planetary defense grid to molten slag. On the Indomitable's bridge, There was a moment of stunned silence as a tactical display updated to show the true scale of what they were facing. Then Lieutenant Beth Foster let out a low whistle and said what everyone was thinking. Well, that's not fair. Captain Morrison didn't take his eyes off the screen, but a slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Life's not fair, Beth. If it was, I'd be on a beach somewhere drinking something with an umbrella in it. He touched his communication panel. Engineering. What V we got left? Give me the honest truth. No sugarcoating. There was a pause before Chief Bradley's voice came through the speakers. The man sounded exhausted, his breathing labored, but his spirit remained unbroken. Reactors holding at 90% capacity, Cap. We've lost all starboard thrusters, so we're maneuvering on port side only. I'm rerouting power from life support to keep the railguns fed, which means some sections are going to get real cold real fast. But Cap. Bradley hesitated, and Morrison could hear the weight in that pause. I've got 13 hull breaches that I can't seal. The automated systems are completely shot. We're down to 15 minutes of breathable air in some sections, maybe 20 if people don't move around too much. Morrison closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tightening. Understood, Tom. Keep doing what you're doing. You're keeping us alive. He switched channels. Hayes! Evacuate those sections and seal them off. Emergency Protocol 7. Commander Lisa Hayes looked up from her station, her face showing the first real crack in her composure. Sir, that's a third of the ship. We've got people in those sections. Our people. I know exactly who's in those sections, Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of command and the burden of impossible choices. But if we don't seal them, the breaches will spread. We lose those sections or we lose the entire ship. Make the call, Commander. Hayes swallowed hard, then nodded. Aye, sir. Initiating evacuation now. Her fingers moved across her console, triggering alarms in the affected sections. All personnel in sections 12 through 18. You have 5 minutes to evacuate the forward compartments. This is not a drill. 5 minutes. Aboard the Witnessing Dawn, Veldar's crew watched in absolute silence as the human warship reorganized itself in the face of impossible odds. They were witnessing something that went against every survival instinct they knew. The humans were deliberately sealing off parts of their own ship, condemning those sections to vacuum and cold, redistributing their remaining crew to maximize survival time in what little remained habitable. They're abandoning a third of their vessel, Veldar's tactical officer said, his voice barely above a whisper, just cutting it loose like dead weight. Not abandoning, Veldar corrected, understanding dawning on him. Sacrificing. They're choosing which parts die so the rest can keep fighting. The tactical officer's scales went pale. That's the logic of a desperate animal backed into a corner. No, Veldar said slowly. That's the logic of a species that refuses to accept defeat. The dreadnought was moving into position now, its massive bulk rotating to bring its primary weapons to bear. Veldar's instruments showed massive power buildups in the enemy vessel's weapon systems. The dreadnought is charging weapons, his tactical officer reported, his voice tight with tension. Primary lance cannons. Forward batteries 1 through 8. Energy signatures indicate maximum yield. Veldar studied the readouts, doing calculations in his head that he wished would come out differently. One shot from those cannons will split that human ship in half. At this range, with their shields already weakened, they can't possibly survive. Then this is over, his science officer said quietly. Veldar felt an unexpected pang of regret settle in his chest. These humans have fought with tremendous courage, even if their tactics have been reckless to the point of insanity. They deserve better than to be vaporized by an enemy they couldn't possibly defeat. Prepare to record their final moments, he ordered. At least we can ensure their bravery is remembered. On the Indomitable, Dr. Emily Parker's voice suddenly cut through command channel, sharp with urgency and barely controlled anger. Captain, I've got crew trapped in the sealed sections. Jenkins, Riley, and Peterson. They're running out of air right now. I can see their biometrics dropping. Morrison's hand clenched on his armrest, his knuckles going white. When he spoke, his voice carried a heaviness that made everyone on the bridge feel the weight of command. I'm aware, Emily. I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do. Get everyone else to the forward sections. That's an order. There was a long pause. Then Parker's voice came back, quieter now. Understood, sir. Parker out. Tom, Morrison said, switching back to engineering. How long can you keep us fighting? I need a number. Bradley's response came immediately, and despite everything, there was something almost defiant in his tone. As long as you need, Cap. I've got a trick or two left up my sleeve. These bastards want our ship. They're going to have to pry it from my cold, dead hands. That's my boy. Morrison allowed himself a brief smile. Foster, what's our weapon status? Don't pretty it up. Foster checked her displays, her expression grim. 3 railguns still operational. Missiles down to 20% capacity. Point defense is running on backup power only. Sir. She paused, clearly not wanting to say what came next. We can't penetrate that dreadnought's armor, not with what we have left. Their shields alone could absorb everything we've got and still have power to spare. Morrison stared at the tactical display, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. The bridge fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the sounds of damage control teams working in the distance and the steady beeping of various systems. The dreadnought loomed on their screens like death itself, growing larger with each passing second. Then a voice spoke up from the back of the bridge, young and uncertain but determined. Sir, what about Kinetic Package Delta? Every head on the bridge turned toward Ensign David Cooper, the youngest member of the crew. He was barely 22, fresh out of the academy, and he looked absolutely terrified. But he was also standing his ground, meeting his captain's gaze without flinching. Morrison's eyebrows rose in surprise. Delta? He blinked, processing what Cooper had just suggested. Cooper, that protocol was a joke. Something we came up with drunk in the mess hall after Harris lost that bet about who could eat the most hot sauce. It's not even a real tactical doctrine. Cooper swallowed hard, but didn't back down. Respectfully, sir, all our best ideas started that way. Didn't we come up with the atmospheric skip maneuver after Johnson's bachelor party? A few people on the bridge actually laughed, the sound strange and almost surreal given their circumstances. Hayes caught on immediately, her eyes widening as understanding dawned. Captain, he's right. We've been collecting debris this whole fight. Our own armor plating, dead missiles, destroyed enemy components, pieces of their ships. We got approximately 40 tons of scrap metal sitting in our cargo bay. Morrison's expression slowly transformed, his features shifting from resignation to something that might have been hope or might have been madness. The smile that spread across his face would have terrified any sane person. It was a smile of someone who had just realized they had one last card to play, and it was absolutely insane. Tom, can you rig magnetic accelerators to the cargo bay? Turn it into one big railgun. Bradley's laugh came through the speakers, slightly manic but full of energy. Can I? Cap, give me 4 minutes and I'll turn our junk pile into the galaxy's angriest shotgun. We're talking about 40 tons of irregular metal fragments accelerated to a decent fraction of light speed. It'll be beautiful. Hayes! Plot me a trajectory that puts us on a direct collision course with that dreadnought. Full burn, everything we've got. Hayes looked up sharply. Sir, a collision course? That's suicide. Morrison leaned forward in his chair, his eyes gleaming with dangerous intent. They'll see us coming, charge their shields to maximum, and focus all their defensive fire on us. They'll expect us to either veer off at the last second or try to ram them. They won't expect us to stop at point-blank range and turn our cargo bay into a relativistic shotgun. Understanding dawned on Hayes' face, followed quickly by something that might have been admiration or horror or both. We'll launch at point-blank range. Their shields are designed for energy weapons and solid projectiles, not 40 tons of irregular debris hitting them from 50 meters away. Exactly. Foster, I want every remaining weapon we have firing at their point defense grid the moment before we launch. Overwhelm their targeting systems. Make them look everywhere except where the real threat is coming from. Cooper, Morrison turned to the young ensign who had just possibly saved all their lives. You brilliant idiot. You're getting a commendation for this. Assuming we survive. Cooper's face broke into a huge grin, despite the terror in his eyes. "Thank you, sir." The Indomitable limped through the darkness of space like a wounded animal dragging itself to shelter. Emergency thrusters fired in short, stuttering bursts, the only propulsion system still functioning after the main engines had been completely destroyed. Behind the battered warship stretched a trail of debris and frozen atmosphere that sparkled in the distant starlight, like a ribbon of ice crystals marking their path through the void. 17 separate hull breaches continued venting precious air into space, each one a wound that bled away the ship's life support reserves with every passing second. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the railing in front of his command chair. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, a burn mark scorched across his chest from when a console had exploded near him during the final moments of the battle. There was dried blood on his temple from a cut he hadn't even noticed receiving, but it was his eyes that showed the real damage. They carried the weight of command, the burden of decisions that had kept some people alive while condemning others to death. "Damage report," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Commander Lisa Hayes consulted her datapad, her fingers trembling slightly as she scrolled through pages of casualty lists and system failures. Her voice remained professionally steady, the tone of an officer delivering information to her superior, but tears tracked down her face, cutting clean lines through the soot and grime that covered her cheeks. Engineering section completely destroyed. Total structural collapse in sections 12 through 18. All hands lost in that area. She paused, swallowing hard. That's Chief Bradley and 7 others under his command. Morrison's jaw clenched, but he nodded for her to continue. Hull integrity is at 34%. Life support is functioning in forward sections only. We're running on emergency power throughout most of the ship. We have 17 critical wounded currently in medical bay, 3 of whom Dr. Parker says won't make it through the night without supplies we don't have. Hayes looked up from her datapad, meeting Morrison's eyes. Total casualties: 14 dead, 23 wounded ranging from critical to minor injuries. We're down to a crew of 33 effective personnel, sir. Morrison closed his eyes briefly, and in that moment every person on the bridge could see the pain etched across his features. 14 people, 14 souls who had trusted him to lead them, to keep them safe, to bring them home. Gone. Just gone. "And the ship?" he finally asked, his voice rough. Hayes took a deep breath. "She'll fly barely. The hull will hold together, if we don't push her too hard. I'm plotting a course to that moon." She pointed to a gray sphere visible on the navigation screen, a barren rock orbiting a dead planet. "We can set down in one of the larger craters, put some solid rock between us and any long-range sensors while we make repairs. Maybe give the crew a chance to rest on solid ground, even if it's just for a few hours. Do it. Make it happen." Morrison turned to his weapons officer. "Foster, any sign of enemy pursuit? Are they regrouping for another attack?" Beth Foster checked her tactical displays, most of which were flickering or showing error messages. "Negative, sir. Long-range sensors show the remaining enemy vessels scattered across 3 star systems. They're running scared. Some are still accelerating away at maximum burn. We're clear, at least for now. Then set condition 3 throughout the ship. Let everyone catch their breath for a minute. They've earned it." The bridge crew began the post-battle procedures with mechanical efficiency, each person moving through their checklist with the practiced ease of trained professionals. But their movements were slower than normal, weighed down by exhaustion and grief. Aboard the Witnessing Dawn, Commander Veldar continued monitoring the human vessel, unable to look away. What he observed next would stay with him for the rest of his life. The humans didn't celebrate their victory. There was no triumphant cheering, no relieved laughter echoing through the corridors, no congratulatory messages being passed between crew members. The communications channels remained eerily quiet except for terse, professional exchanges about damage control priorities and casualty status updates. Instead, they simply got to work. Medical teams moved through damaged corridors wearing full-pressure suits, their helmet lights cutting through the darkness where the ship's lighting had failed. They retrieved bodies from sealed compartments, handling each one with careful reverence, making sure dog tags were secured and personal effects were collected. They treated the wounded wherever they found them, setting up impromptu medical stations in hallways because the main medical bay was overflowing. Damage control parties crawled through twisted wreckage with welding equipment, their tools throwing bright sparks that danced in the vacuum of exposed sections. They sealed breaches one by one, working methodically through a list that seemed impossibly long. Every repair was temporary. Quick patches meant to hold just long enough to get them home, but they worked with focused determination, not wasting energy on complaints or despair. The surviving engineering crew, now led by Ensign Bobby Mitchell, who had been third in command just hours ago, crawled through compartments flooded with radiation from damaged reactors. They wore protective suits that would only buy them minutes of safety, but they went anyway, restoring critical systems that the ship needed to survive. Mitchell moved through Chief Bradley's workspace, continuing the repairs his mentor had died completing, his hands steady even though his eyes were red from crying. And in the ship's small chapel, a modest room that could hold maybe 20 people at most, Captain Morrison stood before 14 sealed body bags arranged in neat rows. The bags were dark blue, made of heavy material designed to preserve remains in the cold of space. Each one had a name stenciled on it in white letters. Veldar activated the audio feed, listening to what came next. "We commit these bodies to the deep," Morrison began, his voice rough with emotion that he no longer tried to hide. The traditional words of naval funeral, adapted for the age of space travel, but carrying the same weight they had carried for centuries. Chief Thomas Bradley, Petty Officer Linda Stevens, Ensign Kevin Webb, Specialist Janet Torres, Technician First Class Raymond Cole, Corporal Lisa Park, Private Daniel Foster, Ensign Timothy Brooks. He read each name slowly, giving each person their moment of recognition. Each name represented someone who had been laughing and joking just hours ago, someone who had dreams and families and futures that would never happen now. They gave their lives so that we could survive. They fought with courage, with honor, and with the knowledge that we stood together. They did their duty without hesitation, without complaint, and without fear. Morrison's voice broke slightly, and he paused to collect himself. "We will remember them. We will carry their memories. And we will get this ship home, so their families know they didn't die for nothing. Fair winds and following seas, shipmates. Until we meet again." "Until we meet again," the 33 survivors echoed, their voices creating a solemn chorus in the small space. Many were openly weeping now, tears flowing freely down faces that still bore the marks of battle. Then something happened that made Veldar's blood run cold with its implications. After the memorial service ended, the crew didn't disperse to private quarters to grieve alone. They moved together to the mess hall, one of the few common areas still pressurized and functional. Someone had managed to prepare food using the emergency rations, nothing fancy but hot and filling. They ate together. Dr. Emily Parker emerged from the medical bay, her scrub stained with blood from hours of emergency surgery. Her hands were still trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Someone immediately handed her a sandwich and guided her to a seat. Lieutenant Foster sat down next to her, and they began talking. Not about the battle, not about the casualties. They talked about normal things, mundane things. Something about a new restaurant that had opened in Seattle. Whether the rain had been bad this year. Small talk to help them remember there was a world beyond this damaged ship floating in the void. Lieutenant Danny Cole stood up, his voice carrying across the mess hall as he started telling a story. "You all remember that time Chief Bradley accidentally set off the fire suppression system in engineering?" A few people smiled despite their tears. "Yeah, so there we are, covered in foam, alarms blaring, and the captain comes down to investigate. Tom looks at me with his completely straight face and says, 'Danny, if the captain asks, that was a scheduled maintenance test. A very thorough test.'" Laughter rippled through the room, genuine laughter mixed with tears. Someone else shared another story about Bradley. Then another person remembered something funny about Stevens. They went around the room, each person contributing memories of the fallen, celebrating their lives rather than just mourning their deaths. They grieved. They cried openly without shame. They raged at the unfairness of losing people they loved. And then, without any dramatic pause or transition, they began planning repairs. Commander Hayes stood up, pulling out her datapad. All right, listen up. We need structural integrity restored within 48 hours if we want to make the jump to friendly space. Mitchell, you're acting chief engineer now. I need a priority repair list within 30 minutes. Mitchell nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Yes, ma'am. I'll make Tom proud. He left detailed notes on the critical systems. I know what needs to be done. You already have made him proud, Bobby. Keep doing what you're doing. Hayes consulted her list. Parker, medical status update. Dr. Parker, finish your sandwich before responding. 17 wounded. 14 now stable after surgery. 3 remain critical, but I think they'll pull through if we can get them to a proper medical facility within the week. I'm running dangerously low on trauma supplies and pain medication, but I can keep everyone alive if we don't run into more trouble. We won't. We're going dark on that moon until we're ready to jump. Foster, weapon status. 1 railgun still operational. Maybe, if we're very gentle with it and pray a lot. Point defense is completely shot. We got maybe 5 missiles left, and I'm not confident they'll even fire properly. Better than nothing. Cooper, environmental systems. Ensign Cooper checked his displays. Life support is solid in the forward 2/3 of the ship. Water recycling is functioning at 80% capacity. We got about a month of supplies if we ration carefully, maybe 6 weeks if we really stretch it. Morrison rejoined them, having taken a few minutes alone to compose himself. Good work, everyone. We'll set down on the moon in approximately 4 hours. Everyone not on essential duty, get some rest until then. That's an order, not a suggestion. Sir, Foster asked hesitantly, what do we do about engineering? Tom's section and the others who, we seal it for now, mark it as a restricted area. When we get home, we'll recover our dead properly and give them the funeral they deserve. Until then, we keep moving forward. That's what Tom would want. That's what they all would want. Commander Veldar sat alone in his private quarters aboard the Witnessing Dawn, the silence pressing around him like a physical weight. The room was dimly lit, just a soft glow from his desk screen illuminating his features. He stared at the half-written report displayed before him, his 3-fingered hands hovering uncertainly over the input controls. The words he needed to write felt impossible to formulate. How did you explain humanity to beings who had never faced true existential threat? How did you make the High Command understand what he had witnessed without sounding like he had lost his mind? He had spent 3 decades in reconnaissance, 3 decades observing species across the galaxy, cataloging their strengths and weaknesses, their cultures and capabilities. He had written thousands of reports, each one clinical and professional. But this one was different. This one felt like it might change everything. Taking a deep breath, he began typing, his fingers moving slowly at first, then gaining speed as the words finally started to flow. Report 847, H. Species designation Humanity. Commander Veldar Reconnaissance Division. Priority maximum. Classification, threat assessment. To the esteemed High Command. In my 3 decades of service to the Zephyrian Empire, I have observed 847 different species across the galaxy. I have watched empires rise from nothing and collapse into dust. I have witnessed battles that reshaped entire star systems, leaving debris fields that will drift through space for millions of years. I have cataloged weapons capable of cracking planets like eggs and technologies that bend the very fabric of reality. Nothing in all those years of service has prepared me for humanity. Veldar paused, reading what he had written. It sounded dramatic, almost hysterical. But it was true. He continued typing. I must begin with their homeworld, as it is essential to understanding everything that follows. Earth is classified in our database as a death world, Class 12. That is the highest hazard rating we have. For context, the High Command made the decision to abandon all colonization efforts on Class 7 worlds because the casualty rates were deemed unacceptable, even with our advanced technology and medical capabilities. Humans evolved on a Class 12 death world, not just survived there by accident, not just barely clung to existence in a few protected areas. They evolved there, spread across the entire planet, and thrived. Their homeworld has killed 99% of all species that ever lived on it. The planet is a graveyard of extinct life forms, layer upon layer of dead civilizations of animals and plants that couldn't adapt fast enough to survive. And it continues trying to kill the humans to this day. It throws predators at them, creatures that can tear through flesh and bone with ease. It unleashes diseases that spread through populations like wildfire. It hits them with weather patterns so extreme they can level entire cities. It shifts and cracks beneath their feet with geological activity that destroys everything they build. It even occasionally tosses cosmic threats at them from space, asteroids, and comets that could end their entire species. The humans' response to all of this was not to hide, not to give up, not to accept their fate as victims of an uncaring universe. Their response was to fight back against their own planet. They domesticated the predators that hunted them, turning wolves into companions and cattle into food sources. They studied the diseases that killed them and developed medicines to cure them. They built structures designed to withstand hurricanes and earthquakes and floods. They mapped the geological patterns of their unstable world and learned to predict where and when it would try to kill them next. They developed technology to track cosmic threats and are working on ways to deflect asteroids before they can impact their world. They looked at a planet that spent millions of years trying to exterminate them, and they said no. They refused to die. They refused to give up. They refused to accept that the universe had decided their fate. Veldar stood up from his desk, beginning to pace his small quarters as his mind replayed the events he had witnessed. His scales rippled with agitation as he continued composing a report in his head before returning to type. I observed a human warship, Yenesi, Indomitable, engaged against overwhelming enemy forces. 3 fleets totaling over 60 vessels converged on their position. Standard tactical analysis, run through our most advanced predictive systems, suggested the humans would either flee to fight another day or surrender to preserve their lives. Both would have been rational, acceptable responses to impossible odds. They did neither. Instead, they initiated something they call Protocol Charlie Foxtrot, which our translation systems render roughly as beautiful disaster or controlled chaos. I believe the humans may have been making a joke with this designation, which itself is disturbing given the circumstances. They deliberately disabled every safety system on their vessel. Every single one. They overloaded their reactor to 140% of safe operating capacity, levels that should have caused catastrophic failure. Then they charged directly into the enemy formation at maximum acceleration. What followed defied every military doctrine we had developed and refined over 3,000 years of warfare. The humans don't fight to minimize their casualties. They don't maneuver to preserve their ship and crew for future engagements. They fight to win at any cost, accepting horrific damage as simply the price that must be paid for victory. They use their own hull as a battering ram. They manually overrode their automated targeting systems to take shots that their computers calculated as impossible. Their captain broadcast taunts and insults to the enemy while simultaneously coordinating complex maneuvers that subjected his crew to 14 gravities of force, levels that should have liquefied their internal organs. Their chief medical officer performed delicate surgery on critically wounded crew members while the ship spun and rolled through space combat. Their chief engineer worked inside active plasma conduits that were hot enough to vaporize most materials, making repairs with superheated energy flowing inches from the body. Every crew member showed biological readings indicating extreme stress, pain, and exhaustion at levels that should have rendered them unconscious or dead. And they simply kept functioning, kept fighting, kept doing their jobs as if their bodies' desperate warnings didn't matter. Veldar sat back down, his hands trembling slightly as he typed the next section. This was the part that truly frightened him. When an enemy deployed a dreadnought, a vessel 50 times the mass of the Indomitable and carrying enough firepower to destroy a moon, I prepared to witness the humans' final moments. I felt regret, which surprised me. These creatures had impressed me with their courage, even if their tactics seemed suicidal. Instead of accepting their fate, they collected all the debris from their own damaged systems. Every piece of torn hull plating, every destroyed weapon, every shattered component, 40 tons of scrap metal that any sane species would have ejected as worthless garbage. Then they accelerated this collection of junk to relativistic speeds and fired it at the dreadnought at point-blank range. They weaponized their own wounds. They turned their damage into ammunition. They destroyed a vessel that should have been invincible using nothing but their own broken pieces, and the sheer audacity to try something that insane. But here is what truly disturbs me, what keeps me awake, and makes me question everything I thought I understood about warfare and survival. The humans aren't fearless warriors who feel no fear. They're terrified. Their biological readings showed extreme stress responses throughout the entire engagement, adrenaline at toxic levels, heart rates that should have caused cardiac failure, brain chemistry indicating they were experiencing what we would classify as temporary insanity brought on by trauma and fear. They were absolutely terrified, and they simply refused to let that fear stop them from doing what needed to be done. Veldar stood again, unable to sit still as he processed what came next in his report. This was perhaps the most important part, the observation that would determine whether the High Command took his warning seriously or dismissed him as compromised by what he had witnessed. Casualty report, 30% losses, 14 dead, 23 wounded ranging from critical to minor injuries. Their ship barely functions, held together by emergency repairs and determination. Systems that should be completely non-operational somehow still work. Sections that should have been abandoned remain partially habitable through engineering that borders on miraculous. And yet, within minutes of the battle ending, the survivors immediately began repairs while simultaneously grieving their fallen. I watched them hold a memorial service for their dead. I listened to Captain Morrison read each name of the fallen, giving them their moment of recognition and honor. The crew openly wept. They cried without shame. They raged at the universe for taking their friends and comrades. Then they went to the mess hall and ate a meal together. They told jokes. They shared stories about the dead, laughing while tears still streaked their faces. They talked about normal things, mundane things, everyday life things that had nothing to do with the horror they had just survived. And within an hour of the memorial service, they were already planning their repair schedule and plotting their course home. They processed their grief and trauma not by hiding from it, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by experiencing it fully and then simply continuing to live. They mourned and moved forward simultaneously, without any apparent contradiction in their minds. Veldar returned to his desk, knowing he was approaching the conclusion of his report. This was where he had to make his recommendations clear and unambiguous. The High Command needed to understand the implications of what he had discovered. I accessed their military history from their public databases. These behavioral patterns are not isolated to this one crew or this one ship. This is consistent across their entire species and throughout their recorded history. During their global conflict-designated World War II, human soldiers regularly performed acts that our own military analysts classify as impossible. They held positions alone against overwhelming numbers. They charged into certain death to save their comrades. They survived wounds that should have killed them through sheer refusal to die until their mission was complete. And afterward, they simply went back to their normal lives, carrying invisible scars but functioning as if nothing had happened. This is their baseline. This is normal for them. What we would consider extraordinary courage requiring years of training and psychological conditioning. They consider simply doing what needs to be done. Recommendation to High Command.